I'm Dr. John. I'm a neuropsychologist, and this is Understanding Exceptional. And this video will be an interesting one. It's an interesting one for me because one of the biggest frustrations I have working as a neuropsychologist in a private practice is when I have to diagnose a child, a adolescent, a young adult. Well, that would seem to be, that's your job, and that would, reasonably be really just a part of it, and maybe the best part, because once we have a diagnosis, now we can really get individuals the help, the tools that they need to be successful. But that's not the case. Diagnoses through the psychiatric and psychological systems are absolutely flawed, and they're not real. What do I mean when I say they're not real? When an individual comes and sees me, whatever we're looking to sort of determine regarding what's happening with them, their behavior, I'm not doing blood draws. There's no brain scans taking place. We're not swabbing any cheeks and growing anything on a petri dish. In the history of mankind, and you'll hear me say this repeatedly through the conversations that we have at the Understanding Exceptional community level, and through these conversations, in the history of humanity, we've never blood drawn ADHD. We've never grown dyslexia on a petri dish. We can't hair follicle test for autism spectrum disorder, these types of things. Now, there'll be people out there that say we can. And in some instances, we have like genetic conditions that we know change the reality of someone's experience, because it changes how their brain systems develop and function. So the internal experience requires a brain, behavior requires a brain. And then we look at the behaviors, which are just a tiny little sliver of what a person's experiences are internally. And then we try to jam those behaviors. We try to assume we know their experiences and put those into a word. That word would be a diagnosis, and now we know what to do. But this is never the case. And we have to be humble enough to recognize we never know what someone else's reality is. And so then when I get to this diagnostic part, where a family has come in and they have concerns, maybe their child's struggling with reading and paying attention or whatever it is. And yes, we definitely want to get new tools when they're needed. And that's really the goal of any evaluation. But the only way we're going to get them the tools that they need is through providing a diagnosis. But it gets really, really complicated. And I provide the following example to make this notion practical. So in a future conversation, we're going to learn and talk about the idea that the vast majority of diagnoses reflect a inconsistent or different interaction between the sensory systems in the brain and the regulatory systems in the brain. Most diagnoses that are very common out there, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, autism spectrum disorder, these types of things that are very common, particularly in children, really at the end of the day reflect a regulatory system that is struggling to regulate the activity of a sensory system. So the behaviors themselves can't occur without a brain. So what in the brain is happening to create those behaviors or those experiences? And so we have to make sure we're looking at that, and we don't through our diagnoses. So it's challenging and it's very frustrating. Sometimes it's embarrassing. So let me give you the example. I can create a sensory system in your brain that your regulatory system is going to lose control over, and it's going to change your behaviors. So here's what I would do. So in this case, I'm an authority figure, and I inform you that I'm going to have you do some things, and it's absolutely important you do everything I ask you to do. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you some information I want you to remember. So that's pretty simple. I know you're smart. I've interacted with you before, so this shouldn't be a big deal. And so once I start speaking, listen carefully. Make sure you're taking this in, because I'm going to test you on it, see how smart you are, see how good your brain works. Oh, real quick, before we get started, you are not allowed to blink. Here I go. So what do I mean by what's actually happening here? So I just said you are not allowed to blink while I'm giving you information, very important information. You're required to remember it. It's going to tell me how smart you are, or it's going to give me lots of information. Your behavior is going to give me lots of information about who you are. So I've established that it's important, but now I've told you you cannot blink. But I give you no opportunity to say, Dr. John, what are you talking about? I have to blink. That is utterly ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and not blink while you're giving me information. You want me to, but I give you no opportunity to have that discussion. So here's what happens. I start speaking. So in your sensory system, you're taking in the information I am giving you. I'm giving you auditory, I'm giving you visual information. But what your regulator had to do was open up another line of thought in your sensory system. So here I am speaking. We'll call that a wheel in your sensory system. Dr. John is speaking. But your regulator had to jump in there and divide your attention one time and constantly update that. So here I am speaking, but you were told you're not allowed to blink. And what in the world is this guy talking about? And your regulator has to continue to hold both of those online. We had to divide tension, divide thinking. We had to take thinking from focused on just what I was saying to not only what I'm saying, but, I better not blink or I'm going to be in trouble. So as I go through this process, I keep talking. You're constantly updating the idea that you're not allowed to blink because you can inhibit that, but it is hard. What's happening now is your sensory system is getting to a point where it's overactive. It's becoming harder and harder to manage. Your eyes are on fire. You know you need to blink. It feels like someone's poking the eye with a needle. And so here I am again. We're in the sensory systems. Dr. John is speaking here. Wow. I've got to constantly update. This guy doesn't, I'm not allowed to blink. What am I supposed to do here? Now, another thought opens up as your eyes get to the point where you cannot manage it anymore. Your sensory system is overactive. Pain hits it. It opens up another line of thought. I'm speaking, don't blink. What in the world is going on? Do I just look to the side and quickly blink? Do I run out of here? Do I tell this guy he's an idiot and I can't do this? Do I tell him there's no way? Do I raise my, what do I do? So here I am speaking, not allowed to blink, and now we're super frustrated, we're overwhelmed, we're agitated. And then I stop as a psychologist and I say, awesome, tell me what you learned. You could look at me, you likely would look at me and go, no idea what you said. Here's why. You told me not to blink. What am I supposed to do with that? I can't sit here and not blink. That's totally ridiculous. It's really frustrating, frankly, that you would even ask me to do it. I can't, and I stopped. Oh my goodness. Wow. All right. So I gave you important information. I know you're smart. You're telling me you didn't take much away from that. All right. So let's explain those behaviors. Diagnostically, I'm coming at you here because there's diagnoses that are going to describe those behaviors for me as a psychologist, psychiatrist, whomever's in this field. You're telling me you didn't pay attention. Well, we got a word for that. We got a diagnosis for that. We call that ADHD. Now, as I was observing you, you were kind of moving around a lot. You were shuffling in your seat. You seemed a little dysregulated. Maybe you have the double dose. Maybe you have the combined presentation of ADHD. I should probably think of that diagnostically. You're telling me that you're focused on your blinking. Well, I wasn't even thinking about it. So you shouldn't have been, should I think about some anxiety here, some OCD? You're just obsessing over this thing. Just let it go. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. You were also telling me that your eyes hurt. You got like a sensory issue. That's kind of like anxiety, a sensory problem. Jeez, maybe I should consider that. I was thinking you're kind of cranky right now, like a little bit emotional. Just chill out. Like I wasn't thinking about blinking. My eyes weren't hurting me. Geez, that doesn't seem right. Okay. So I'm going to explain to you diagnostically what I just saw from you. I'm going to diagnose you. The reason why you struggle to take away information from this very important information I was giving you here was because I'm diagnosing you with ADHD, a combined presentation, and I'm also diagnosing you with anxiety, with a little bit of OCD kind of stuff in there, maybe a little bit of depression. So that's our explanation. You have ADHD and anxiety. What in the world is going on? Nothing of what I just said diagnostically as the psychologist is real. None of those are real. Here's what I was actually seeing. I was seeing your behavior. I was seeing the motor output systems. I was seeing the result of a sensory system that could no longer be managed by the regulatory system. In other words, I was seeing behaviors that reflected the fact that you had to regulate your blinking, which overwhelmed your regulatory systems and overactivated your sensory systems. causing the behaviors I observed. So my diagnoses were nothing more than a description of what was taking place in your brain. Behavior is movement. Behaviors are symptoms. They are never the source of the person's experiences. They give us clues as to what may be going on, but they are not the source. Now, when we have diagnostic systems that do nothing but rely on behavior, the symptoms, and we have individuals who believe that their view of your behavior is your reality internally, we now have a system that's broken. This is the totality of how our broken diagnostic system leads to ineffective treatments. This is why mental health itself is fundamentally broken, even though we're all recognizing the need to do better things. We're putting more money into it. We're trying to figure out how do we cure some of these conditions that are going on. But the problem is the conditions themselves don't really exist. ADHD wasn't what was going on. It was your brain was dysregulated. So ADHD wasn't the answer. Your brain was the answer. And your brain functioning was reflected in your behavior. If we're trying to look for what's causing things like autism spectrum disorder, if we use a process where we say, well, the behaviors are this, and now we have this diagnosis, and now we need to look for what happened, what might have occurred in the environment. Did we take Tylenol? What were the events that preceded the behavior? But we're not linking those events, whether it's food, whether it's vaccines, whether it is Tylenol, with how did that impact how this brain developed and functions, which therefore cause behaviors. Autism spectrum's not its own thing. It is a cluster of behaviors that result from a brain whose regulatory systems operate differently. This is not to say that these things aren't debilitating, and they're not. It's not to minimize the implications for the individual when their brain systems operate differently and we're providing these diagnoses. But we have to recognize that diagnoses are not objective, they are subjective. And this is evident in, I've attended so many school meetings, particularly, where I will provide a diagnosis. Now, my particular paradigm or my approach to understanding a human is to use the lens of, I want to try to figure out through behavior and through what the individual communicates, what might be going on in this brain, and then understand why this behavior might be occurring. And then I want to go from there to, all right, knowing this link that can't be broken, you got to have a brain to have behavior and to have an experience. Knowing what we're seeing behaviorally and experientially, maybe we can figure out a little more what's going on in the brain. And now let's start talking about the tools. What tools are going to be needed to allow that individual to change or alter or adjust their behavior and to make their human experience a better one. And the diagnostic system doesn't allow for that. We pretend that these words are the source. The behavior is the source. There's the word, there's the intervention. And so this is why, for me, the diagnostic piece of an evaluation tends to be the most challenging, because in most situations, there isn't a word that describes the behavior, and there certainly isn't a word, because it's not objective, that tells us this is your child's or your reality. Behaviors give us clues, but they're only a small piece of an individual's total reality. And so when we use diagnoses that look only at the behaviors, we're only looking at the symptoms, and we're never considering the source. People will tell you we're considering the source, we're not. We need to pivot backwards, and we need to really start understanding the brain systems behind how those have developed and how they're functioning that result in experiences, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's dyslexia, whether it's autism, whatever it may be. None of those occur just from behavior, because you can't have a behavior without a brain. So if we understand that those words are now descriptions of how the brain is developed and functioning, and therefore we see some behaviors, therefore we need a word in order to get tools to do things differently. That is really what's happening in this interaction through the diagnostic system. And so this is why it's so frustrating for me, because the diagnostic system isn't objective, and In every case, a diagnosis suggests that something about you is disordered, you have a mental illness, there's something wrong. In so many cases, there's nothing wrong per se. Now, the experience might not be ideal, or we may want to change behavior, but it's the brain that's operating differently. So we need to look at why. What's causing that? What in the brain? What are the experiences that are resulting? And now, what tools do we need to put onto the table that so that when a person applies their effort, because effort never leaves the equation. Whenever I give a diagnosis, as complex as that is and as frustrating as it can be, I always tell the kids I work with and the families I work with that these ridiculous words here never eliminate the reality that you have to put forth effort to achieve success. These words are not excuses, but these words then are therefore simply words to get us to new tools so that when you do apply your effort, you get to the success or the outcomes you desire or deserve. The behaviors are changed for the better. At the end of the day, when somebody gets a diagnosis, there's something about their brain's functioning, development and functioning, that's causing behaviors that we want to look at changing. So if we're going to change behaviors for the better, we need to know why they're occurring to begin with so we can bring the right tools. So in this regard, those words, those diagnoses, I want you to think of them as nothing more than toolkits. Certain words bring you certain tools. And when I explain this to parents and I say, today is a process of understanding how the brain has developed and it's functioning, understanding why the behaviors are occurring, not to excuse them, because some of them we want to change, understanding the experiences that result, some of them we want to change, but we've got to know why they're occurring to begin with. And then we're going to figure out what do we need to do in terms of tools so that when your child applies their effort, follows the rules, they have the right tools to use that amazing brain of theirs to get the success or to actualize the behaviors they desire and deserve. Then we're going to use the words that the system has created. The system has said, if you don't do it like everyone else, there's something wrong with you. We created this book. We're the average, the normal, the typical. And if you don't do it like us, something's wrong with you because you should be doing it our way. So if it's not like us, we're going to find a word that tells you what's wrong, and now we'll give you tools. But that's fundamentally a process that pathologizes anything that's different. And by the way, those who are neurodivergent almost always are the most intelligent, the most innovative, the most creative. These are the people that change the world. They change the world because their brains operate differently. When a brain operates differently and it does it differently than the masses, well, that's when innovation occurs. They think of a problem differently. They go through different systems of their brains to come up with solutions. They offer up levels of creativity that those who have the typical brain, they're just going to go right down the center of the road. So neurodivergence shouldn't be associated with pathology. There are conditions that are very, very debilitating, and I don't want to minimize that. And many of them do require lifelong care. But even in those situations, if we want to get to the point where we're potentially creating cures, we need to stop looking at these words as though they're their own thing, these diagnoses. They are simply reflecting the realities of brain development and functioning and the different systems. And until we do that, we're not going to find cures and we're not going to have meaningful interventions. All we're doing through all the pharmacology, through a lot of these interventions, we're treating the symptoms. So that's lifelong stuff. And how many of you have had the experience, whether it's yourself or a loved one, where the antidepressant pill didn't work or the therapy didn't work? It's because those are symptom managers, not brain changers or ways to recalibrate how the brain is connecting and integrating and functioning. And until we get to that point, it's going to be a long road to creating a better human experience for everyone. And we deserve that. So thank you for hanging in there with me through that. There's lots more of this nerdy stuff at understandingexceptional.com. We're going to have a ton of conversations. This is a conversation format. This is an interactive community. This is not a community where I give you the answers and you digest them. This is a community where we have honest discussions. We have the freedom of exploring topics, whether they're controversial or not. We are going to be honest because honesty is the greatest freedom we have. And the more we put out there, the more we talk, the more we communicate, the more we understand, the better experience we create for everyone. Remember, understanding is empowerment. So if you enjoyed this, do the social media thing where you thumbs up it, thumbs down it, leave a